Hello and welcome to Eastern Horizon. This is Malika Yubsumbul. We are live on X, Facebook, and YouTube. Turkey has jumped into the countries who are making the intercontinental ballistic missile. And the recent launch of Turkish missile, Yildirim Han, has a range of 6,000 kilometers that could reach to the Africa, Europe, mean that many countries in Asia. So it's a wide range missile that Turkey has going to launch. And before this, Turkey is also into the fighter jets and have the Khan. That is one of the fighter jet that Turkey proud to be the launching of this jet. So I have joined from Istanbul, Ambassador Matthew Bryza. He is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former White House and senior State Department official. Thank you very much, Matthew Bryza, for joining from Istanbul.
Sure, Malik. It's very nice to be with you. Thank you for a chance to exchange views.
My pleasure. So let me go. And I just mentioned in the intro that Turkey has launched this Yildirim Han. It's 6,000 range missile. And Turkey finally entered into the intercontinental ballistic missiles countries club. So do you think that why Turkey need ICBM?
Well, I mean, a couple of reasons. One, look at the map, and you see that to Turkey's south is the tremendous security mess in Syria. A little further south is Israel, Gaza. You look to the north, on Turkey's extended northern border is Ukraine, or Ukraine and Russia. And then to the east, there's, thank goodness, the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia was settled. But there's still potential instability there. So if you think about the way NATO member states, of which Turkey, by the way, not only is a member, but has the second largest military in NATO, NATO doctrine is about being able to project force deeply, deep strikes. And NATO's deep strike capabilities are, I guess I could say, endangered because the U.S. Trump administration seeks to reduce the U.S.'s security presence within the European part of NATO. So that's one reason why. I mean, it's just prudent national security planning to be able to have deep strike capabilities in case somebody may think about attacking you. It's a deterrent. But the other reason is that Turkey has developed a world-class defense technology or defense industries, beginning in the late 1980s and in response to a series of arms embargoes against Turkey. So the first embargo was actually placed by the United States in 1974 due to Turkey's, if you're a Greek Cypriot, you would say invasion of Cyprus, or if you're a Turk or a Turkish Cypriot, you'd say intervention to defend the rights of the Turkish Cypriots and to, in accord with Turkey's obligations under the Treaties of Guarantee of 1960 to do so. And so there was that embargo. There were embargoes in the 1990s by some European members of NATO in response to concerns about how Turkey was fighting against the PKK, Kurdish terrorist organization. And then in 2019, again, there were European embargoes imposed on Turkey by European members of NATO in response to or as a result of the high tensions between Greece and Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. So each time there have been those embargoes, the Turkish defense industries have accelerated their development of higher end weapons. In the 1980s, Turkey was almost 100% dependent on imported defense technologies. And today it covers about 95% of its own defense technology needs. And the final point, has become a major exporter of defense technology. So I would guess Turkey would also seek to export some of these new missiles, the Yildirim Hans.
Yeah. So we mentioned about this, that Turkey, this ICBM missile that Yildirim Han is, it's for deterrence, or it's somewhere it comes that it could be a threat to someone. And you also mentioned that Turkey was under embargo by the United States. And Chelsea Gabbard, she mentioned that there are some ICBs who are really threat to the U.S. Homeland Security. And the U.S. She mentioned the 5 countries, that their ICBMs are really, they think that it could be a threat to the U.S. So what could be the Washington reaction towards a Turkish ICBM?
Do you mean in Washington, the reaction?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, it's no secret to the intelligence community and the U.S. defense sector that Turkey has been developing this missile. It hasn't been done in secret, and relations between Turkey and the United States have really improved under the Trump administration. So I think there's not much concern in Washington, at least not now. I mean, in the Trump administration. I mean, I'm sure the Armenian American diaspora, the Greek American diaspora will express concerns. But I mean, Turkey doesn't have really any serious security concerns about Greece or the Greek Cypriots, but the country of Greece and the Greek Cypriots are obsessed with Turkey as a potential threat. But it's very interesting. I think Greece and Cyprus are sort of strategic afterthoughts for Turkey now. So I don't think it'll be much of an issue in Washington, except in those diaspora communities.
And what reaction can become from the Greece? Because Greece is something like the arch rival between Turkey. So Greece can make some storm at the European Union platform or something like this?
It's possible. I mean, in the past, that would have been the case. Like if the tensions between Turkey and Greece were high, were elevated, like as I mentioned during 2019, 2020, yeah, then it would. But Turkey has no military designs on Greece. Their dispute is territorial, right? It's about whether or not islands are entitled to an exclusive economic zone, and therefore how small should Turkey's or how large should Turkey's exclusive economic zone be in relation to that of Greece. And a ballistic missile with a range of 6,000 kilometers would fly right over Greece. It would never be used, of course, against Greece. But the Greeks are worried about other Turkish military capabilities, of course. Yeah.
Indeed. So, yeah, we just mentioned about this, that the Turkey, I mean, that the US, you said that there is intelligence and everything they know, and there is everything that's going on into the Turkish defense industry is actually under the consent of the Washington. So do you think that there is some red line that Washington has drawn for Turkey? Because we saw that there was a row between the US and Turkey on F-35. And I think then after that, we saw that the Turkey has made Khan, its homemade fighter jet. I think the first jet they have introduced. So do you think that there will be some point where I think that this between Ankara and Washington would be some sort of the uncomfortable on some defense sector?
Well, first of all, it's a mischaracterization to say that Turkey needs the permission of any country to choose what weapon systems it develops. That's not true. That's not how it works. There are many people in Washington, as I was mentioning before, especially in diaspora communities, so also in the United States, who are not comfortable with Turkey developing this world-class defense industry that it has over the course of the last 30 years or so. But they don't get a vote. I mean, Turkey's a sovereign nation. It develops whatever capability it wants, just like any other country, whether it be China or Russia or any other NATO member state. The US doesn't tell France or the UK what weapon systems to develop. They develop what they want. I ran a think tank in Tallinn, Estonia for a few years. And one of the things we tried to encourage was to persuade the three Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to work together and rationalize the procurement of and development of their weapon systems. And they weren't interested at all. Each country wants to develop its own weapon systems as they wish. I do agree with you, yeah, that Turkey being expelled from the F-35 fifth generation fighter program was another one of those catalysts, as I described in the beginning. That is essentially an embargo that led Turkey to develop the Khan fifth generation fighter. Now, we should keep in mind, though, the Khan fighter there's no indigenous jet engine for the Khan. Turkey can't develop a fighter jet engine or has not yet at that level. So that jet will use US jet engines. So that shows that Washington is not against Turkey developing such a capability. And there's a good chance Turkey will be brought back into the F-35 program. Turkey already paid for many of those aircraft, only 4 of which were delivered. And Turkey was going to be a producer of many of the components of that fighter. I don't think that will come back, but I think Turkey will probably eventually be able to acquire the F-35s for which it has already paid. But yes, again, it's conceivable that as U.S. politics evolve, and as a less Turkey-friendly president comes into office, the then President Trump, that Turkey being an increasingly influential and militarily capable middle power will make some people uncomfortable in the U.S. national security establishment at some point. But in my experience, even as tensions were high between Turkey and its European NATO allies, there are still plenty of people in the U.S. national security community who lauded or praised Turkey as being a very reliable NATO ally, notwithstanding the tensions with Greece.
Okay, so let me come to some other comparison. That at one side, Turkish defense industry is booming and boosting, and they have they launched a jet. They have now ICBM. They are also very much in the drones. But on the other hand, we saw that there is a very strong dents on the Turkish economy. So, I mean that having a such of a very sophisticated defense industry, why not this defense sector positive impact is coming onto the economy of Turkey? And there is that much inflation going on, and there is also, we saw that the economy is not in good condition.
Yeah, it's true. The economy is not in good condition, but a major goal of developing these weapon systems and such a strong defense sector is exports, is to earn revenues. It's the whole idea. They export honey and hazelnuts, and they export weapon systems, and they need more foreign currency coming in, right, to help strengthen the lira. So, but the economic challenges here are severe. Inflation is still well above 20%. It was at like 86% a few years ago. The country had been following both monetary and fiscal policies that were unorthodox. On the monetary side, there was a policy that claimed, I think absolutely falsely, that if you have a weakening currency and high inflation, you need to cut or reduce interest rates. That turned out to be a disastrous policy, and it's taking several years to repair the damage of those policies. Also, there was a huge amount of money being pumped into the economy for political reasons as elections were approaching. So the combination of the cutting of interest rates and then the fiscal stimulus led to very high inflation and a sharp depreciation of the lira. But again, the export of defense articles works in the positive direction if you want to reduce inflation and strengthen the Turkish currency, the Turkish lira.
So, how do you think that this, ICBM means toward Moscow? Because Turkey was also a long desiring into the S-400 and I think S-500. They were also very intended to get this batteries. So, what it tends towards Moscow, that this ICBM means, because Turkey sometimes also have some, the overlapping of the interest between Ankara and Moscow sometimes, especially on the Ukraine and some other chapters.
So yeah, you're right. Turkey did acquire S-400s. And that then triggered the moves against Turkey with regard to the F-35 program. And that led to a sharp deterioration of U.S.-Turkish relations. Turkey's the only NATO member state who's acquired a Russian air defense system in recent years, not counting the ones that were inherited by the former Warsaw Pact states way back when. I haven't heard Turkey express any interest in S-500s in the future because the focus for these last few years has been ending this dispute with the United States over S-400s and the F-35. And that, by the way, the rumors are that that's about to be resolved, not only in the context of what I said about Turkey returning to the F-35 program, but for a couple of years, the two sides have been making progress in coming up with a way for Turkey to not deploy the S-400 system, put it that way. Turkey, as far as Russia is concerned, there's a strong and long tradition, even during the Cold War in Turkish national security policy, of a split. Some and most national security thinkers and practitioners in Turkey focus first and foremost on NATO and look at the Soviet Union or Russia as a threat. But in recent years, there's been a second piece of national security thinking, including within the military and intelligence services, that's called the so-called Eurasia School, which holds that Turkey's natural geostrategic place in the world is not in the West and with Europe and the US, but it's in the East with Russia and China, in keeping with the Turkic part of Turkey's identity as being from, way back when, Central Asia. And so that's a debate that's been going on for a long time in Turkish national security policy, in theory. And what drives that debate is the historical fact that throughout the history of Turkey and Russia, or the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire, Turkey fought more wars against Russia than against any other country, and it didn't do well. I mean, it was 11 or 13 wars, and lost all of them except for 2, or maybe they came out evenly. So I think nobody in Turkey wants to provoke Russia. Certainly nobody wants to attack Russia, but also Turkey doesn't want to be unprepared if Russia does something very worrisome and attacks, let's say, not Turkey, but Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan-Russia relations are dismal. They have been since Russia shut down a civilian Azerbaijani airliner 2 Christmases ago. President Putin has refused to apologize and even refused to accept responsibility when it was unambiguously, absolutely a Russian air defense system that shut down that airplane. So relations are really terrible between Azerbaijan and Russia. I don't ever expect Russia to attack Azerbaijan, but it might threaten Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan and Turkey have a military alliance that's based on something that's akin to Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. So an attack on one is an attack on the other. So, for that reason, Turkey wants to be ready to deter any Russian attack on Azerbaijan as well.
So we just mentioned about this factor purely comes under the deterrence, but I think you mentioned about this that Turkey is boosting its defense industry and might be in future maybe they are going to something like sell this defense, that ICBM. So to selling the ICBM, I think it could be quite unique, I think, because mostly the countries that are using the ICBM are for the self-defense or for their deterrence. But do you think that Turkey is going to be set a new precedent if they are going to offer this ICBM to someone?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, people are using the moniker ICBM, but it's really they're intercontinental missiles that were based in Europe, the intermediate range nuclear forces, right? Because they could go from Europe to the Asian part of the Soviet Union, or could hit the Middle East. So I think it's a long range missile, right? And so if we call it an ICBM, and you think of it like a Chinese or a Russian or a US or UK or French, I think those are the 5 countries with ICBMs that you mentioned in the beginning, then I would think it's unlikely that Turkey would export them. And it would only do so in close consultation with NATO allies. But yeah, I agree. I mean, generally, ICBMs are not exported. But the United States, the UK's submarine-based nuclear missile fleet it's based on U.S. missiles, and in fact, those can't be launched without U.S. permission. So I would suppose if Turkey plans to export it as an ICBM, as a longer-range missile, as long as the UK missiles, that would probably require some not just close consultations, but agreement by the other NATO allies. Yeah, but if it's treated just as a longer-range missile, which Europe really needs is in short supply of for deep strike to deter Russian attacks on NATO territory, then it wouldn't be so controversial. So we need to learn more about how the range of this new Yıldırım compares with truly intercontinental ballistic missiles.
I understand. So my last question is this: that do you think that this is not the double standard by the Americans, that some ICBM they think that they are really threat for them, but Turkish ICBM is not pose any threat to the Washington? So I think that we also mentioned about this, that ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile. So the definition that Washington have on the ICBM, it have some dual standards.
Oh, I haven't seen any reaction by Washington yet on this, but no, I mean, why? It's not a double standard. I mean, Turkey is a NATO ally. It's got, as I said before, the second largest military in NATO. It is a crucial security partner for the United States. So, but let's see. I mean, again, let's see how the United States reacts, and maybe we can have a conversation again if indeed the range is truly that of an ICBM, and the U.S. doesn't recognize that. Yeah.
I really appreciate Ambassador Matthew Bryza. I really appreciate your I really enjoyed talking with you, and we will keep more on Eastern Horizon. You are welcome on Eastern Horizon.
Thank you, Malik.
Thank you so much.
It was fun. Have a wonderful rest of today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.